Welcome, everybody, to a very special session of Minute Mentoring. I am delighted to have Lydia Fenet here with me. You might remember that last summer, during the lockdown, we started doing these Minute Mentoring sessions, modeled after a lot of the things that Lydia had been doing to try to do a lot of outreach, which she's so good at. And we wanted to come together today. We have some special things to talk about, which we're going to do in a moment. Let me not forget, though, to thank my Minute Mentoring co-founders, Jamie Zweiback and Dee Martin. Thank you so much. Also, Caitlin Sickle and Aaron Landers are a part of our group and our leadership development team, and we thank you so much. And Bracewell LLP was the founding partner from the first company that really took us under their wing, and they've stayed with us all of these years, and so we very much appreciate that. Lydia Fenet is an amazing person. She has written a book, you might remember. It's called The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You. This one is the paperback. I am the lucky recipient of this book. It's coming out in paperback with an extra chapter that we're going to talk about in a moment. That's a tease. It's great, and I loved it because I thought it's super relevant to today. And I have a book coming out. It's all mentoring. It just literally came in this morning. It's called Everything Will Be Okay: Life Lessons for Young Women from a Former Young Woman, which is kind of funny, right?
I am also a former young woman, so I loved the title of your book, Dana.
I love the title of yours. I love everything about your book. I love everything about it. And I can't wait till the pandemic is over when we can actually get together. Well, maybe we can now that we have 25% dining in New York. Lydia, before we get started, since a lot of people know who I am and what I do, in a nutshell, what would you like people to know about you before we get started?
I've worked at Christie's auction house in New York City for the past 20 years, but really the reason I wrote the book is because I'm a charity auctioneer. And in that capacity, I've raised $500 million for nonprofits around the world, essentially standing on stage and selling things that nobody really wants. So I like to tell you that I can sell anything to anyone, and so much of that has to do with confidence. And that's what I wanted to share in The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You. Share my confidence with other people and hope that they can find lessons and have confidence in their own lives.
Well, let's jump in because I want to start there. One, also, you have a very big heart. You're a charitable person in addition to doing the auctioneering, and the River Fund was something that you really wanted to focus on. Tell people a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So when the pandemic hit in New York, gala season, which is where mainly all of the auctions happen, was completely decimated. So all of the big fundraising moments for charities were gone overnight. And the River Fund was one that has always been close to my heart. I had just gone to work at their food pantry in November, and I started getting images about a month into the pandemic of the food lines that were wrapped 4 times around the block. And I could not believe what I was seeing. And I felt so helpless because in a normal world, I get on stage in front of 1,000 people and essentially shame people into giving money to the organization over a glass of wine. And in this instance, I did not have that opportunity. So I took to social media and started really how we met on Instagram Live, where I would highlight women, what they were doing around the pandemic, just give people information at a time when we all felt so lost, and hopefully spark power in them. And it was all done to raise money for the River Fund. And so that for me was such an amazing moment, watching all of these women come to do this on their own time for nothing at all other than to just raise awareness around this organization. And obviously you were one of them. And Dana, when I was reading your book, I didn't realize you had such incredible ties to in Africa, the Mercy Ship and all of that as well. And it was so nice to know that you too have found that calling in your life, because charity is such an incredible way to give back. And I think you get so much more from it sometimes than people even realize.
Yeah, I write about that a lot in the book, about perspective. I call it perspective with a capital P. And I think that's also super important in the middle of this past year that we've all been dealing with, is that it can be very isolating being in a pandemic. But one of the ways to deal with pressures, I think, is to find a release valve where you can give back in a way. And you've heard it before, of course, the more you give, the more you get back and in return. But also I talk about the importance of how doing charitable work together has brought my husband and I together. Yeah. And as part of relationship building, there's a lot about Peter in this book. My husband says that everybody should read the book because then men will understand that they will never fully understand women. And he said that
Peter does understand women because he's so incredible in
pretty good.
What we're seeing in the world today in terms of working women and having that partner who really meets you on that level.
Yeah, here's a good question. This is just off the top of my head. We did get some questions from everybody that follows Minute Mentoring, and we'll get to some of those. But let me ask you about this. So I write about this young woman in my book. I write about her specifically, but her story is replicated through many of these young women that I know. Let me just set her up. So she is single, sort of late 30s. Her career has taken off and she is doing great, but she's also extremely busy with work. And she gets a lot of pressure from family about trying to find the perfect guy that she could marry and that could have kids because, and I think she already has that pressure on herself anyway. So I was trying to encourage people that love young women in their lives to try to give them a little bit of a break. Any advice that you have for people that are going through that, or if you've experienced that or see it in your own life?
I see it endlessly. I mean, I live in New York City, and there are a lot of women who I know who are exactly where you are talking about with this woman in your book. They have applied their 20s and their 30s to their job. They are fulfilled by their career. They love their career. They may or may not want what everybody thinks is the perfect package of marriage. And so I feel like, as you said, there's so much societal pressure. We put so much pressure on people that this is the way that life has to look. And I truly believe that we all define what it all is, right? People are like, oh, you have it all. You've figured out work-life balance. No, I figured out what works for me. And I think if you always put that question back to yourself, what is your all? Is your all having a fulfilling career where you are absolutely doing everything you need to do and hitting those markers, and this is what you want in your life? That's your all. If you want to get married and have a perfect relationship where your husband is supportive in the way that it has worked for you, Dana, like that is your all. For me, it was a lot of children very quickly because I waited to get married until I was in my 30s, even though my husband and I had been together since we were in our 20s. That worked for me. So we all write our own book. Just make sure that the choices you're making are going to make you happy, and just block out the white noise as much as you can, as hard as it is.
One of the things I write about too is that part of that pressure is that you start thinking, what are other people thinking about me and my life choices?
Yes.
And it's so refreshing to be reminded, and I still even have to remind myself this as a former young woman, that most people aren't thinking about you.
Absolutely. It's so true. It's so true.
People are pretty much always thinking about, even think about yourself.
Yeah.
When you're thinking what somebody else is thinking about you, you're thinking about yourself.
Absolutely. I found over the years, there have been so many times I've run into people from early on in my life, high school or college, and they'll say, well, I didn't graduate from college. Remember, I left. I absolutely don't remember that. I'm sure it was the scandal of the year at the time. 20 years in, who remembers any of that? So I think you're right. Really focus on yourself, what makes you happy. And again, try to block out the white noise.
I write a story in my book about embarrassments or disappointments in the workplace. And there was this one time when I was a deputy press secretary to the president. It was January of 2005. So I was brand new in the actual West Wing itself, even though I'd worked in the administration, other places. And I was asked if I could brief the president before he had to do an interview because the director of communications had to go on to another meeting. And that guy, Dan Bartlett, said, I'll brief the president with you, but then if you could stay with him during the interview while I go do this other thing. And I was like, sure. But he knew it was my first time in the Oval Office with the president by myself for an interview. So I go to do the interview or go to the briefing. And I don't even know if President Bush knew my name at the time. He would dispute that, but I'm not sure. So I go in, and the president and Dan have a disagreement about what was about to happen with the interview. And the president said, no, I said I would talk to him. I didn't say I would do an on the record interview. So there was a miscommunication. And finally, the president put his foot down, and he was right about the reason. And he said, I'm not doing an interview, and therefore she doesn't need to be here. And then he looked at me and was like, see yourself out. And I was mortified. Like the feeling of embarrassment and fear and shame was just like burning red hot. And so it's only like 32 steps from the Oval Office to the press office. So I walk and I close the door behind me, and I was tearful, not full on crying, but tearful. And I called my husband and I said, Peter, I told him what happened. And he said, well, just think, for the rest of your life, you can say, I've been kicked out of better places than this. So we were laughing. Fast forward, 2010, I'm doing President Bush's book tour. And I'm trying to distract him because he's like, doesn't want to do press interviews. So I'm trying to waste some time. And I said, Mr. President, do you remember when you kicked me out of the Oval Office? And he said, I never did that. I said, no, you did. Remember? And this happened. And then this, and Dan came in, and then you were going to do the interview, but you didn't. And I remember every single detail of it. And I can still feel the shame. And he's like, I have no recollection of this, Dana. I don't think so. And then he said, let me ask, are you still upset about this? And
the answer is
yes. And he said,
absolutely not.
To let it go. And maybe let me ask you about that in terms of your advice for people. Because you have some in here about setbacks.
Yes.
And people can feel maybe like this year has been a setback, but like a career setback, what's the best way that you found to be resilient and bounce back?
The thing about a career setback is there's always a reason that it happens. You've either put yourself in a situation that you didn't have the answer to and you've gone too quickly, you've sort of, in the skiing terminology, you're over your skis at that point, or you're in a situation that you don't know how to handle and you've handled it incorrectly. So I always feel a career misstep or something that happens that's ultimately a setback is a moment to reflect on what's happened and think about a different path. Right? So you didn't get the job that you wanted. You didn't get the promotion that you wanted. So if you were to sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and draw out the reason why, did you push yourself into something you didn't really know what you thought you know about? Was there somebody else who was better qualified, and what did they have that you did not have that you could work on in order for next time for your name to be at the top of that list? Or ultimately, was it a personality issue where you and the person who you were going to be reporting to didn't have the right personality match, and that is the why it happened? There are a lot of reasons that are not necessarily personal in the sense that you have to cry because you feel like it's something that's wounded to your soul. And I always say you need to almost take yourself out of that and look at the reasons objectively. Okay, maybe I need to take a public speaking class, and that would put me in a situation where I would be better suited for that job. So I always say with a setback, take the time to mourn it. I'm a big believer in emotions. I'm a huge crier. I will sit down and cry for an hour. I will grieve something that didn't happen that I really wanted. But ultimately, I always think to myself, okay, I didn't get it. Watch me, because next time I will. So that's what you need to think about a career setback. And every time it happens, and Dana, I know you will feel the same way when I say this, every time something like that happens, 2 years out from that, you'll look back and think, okay, I understand why that happened. I may not necessarily agree with it, but I know why it did. So again, that perspective piece that you talk about is so important over the course of a career.
And also, I think feeling the emotions, and I write about that too, which is that, we have this gift of being human and our lives. And I'm not saying cry at the board meeting, or in front of your presentation, but if you have emotions and you need to get them out, or maybe you call a friend or something, but I definitely think that this idea for many years of like holding everything in has led to people feeling like they're constantly in crisis.
Yeah.
And I write about trying to find that place of serenity and some tools in the book about how you could possibly do that. I love this idea that I picked up actually in college, and I've done it ever since. And it's where you take a list of all of your worries and concerns and put them on a hard copy piece of paper. And it might be old fashioned. You can type it out if you want. List all of your concerns, and then you have 2 columns. Is this something that I have control over or not? Mm-hmm. If it is something you have control over, what is your action plan to do something about it? And then I would take that piece of paper, fold it up, put it in my bag, and just carry it with me, because those worries and concerns come up over and over again. Even when you soothe yourself, maybe an hour later or the next 2 days, it comes back. You can pull that piece of paper up out of your bag, look at it again. And I was really happy to hear there was a young woman here at Fox that had a chance to read the early part of the book. And she said she started doing that, and that it just made her feel a little bit more like she was in control, but also she didn't have to be in control of everything.
Yes. It's so funny. You talk about the pencil and paper thing a lot in your book, and I do the same thing as well. There's something very cathartic about expressing your emotions, but writing them down. I found that very interesting. You talk about it in a thank you note. You talk about it again when you're even just weighing out the principle of like writing down in a meeting, taking notes and remembering and paying attention and being present. And I think that that goes to that point too. It's being present in your own life and realizing that there are some things you will not have control over the course of your life. And there are other things that you can control, and being aware of those and not letting those emotions consume you, I think, is what makes you a calm and centered person.
Yeah. I try to be sometimes. Breaking news doesn't work. Here's a question we got from the group. And I actually interviewed you for a portion of this, of my book, because I was so taken with the most powerful woman in the room is you. And that is, any advice for keeping skills and staying relevant and visible with a company or other parts of your clients or where it might be during this time when most people feel like all they're doing is talking into the computer?
Yes. And honestly, this is such a difficult topic. And I get this question over DM, over LinkedIn so many times. And it really boils down to networking more than anything. You have your external clients that you're looking to network with. You're looking to network with external people. But in your company, this is the year to think about growing your internal network.
Oh, I love this. Wait, okay.
Yeah.
Growing your internal network. Making friends in the office.
Exactly.
Okay.
You should, in the same way that I say to people, set time aside to go onto LinkedIn and connect with 10 people over the course of a week. Make sure that you're reaching out to people that you're interested in meeting with, but make those connections. Force yourself outside of your comfort zone and make those connections. You should be doing the same thing internally. People have a little more time. They're used to being on Zoom. There's a long work day taking place, 15 minutes with 3 to 4 people a week. That is your internal networking assignment for me. So 3 to 4 people you don't know, it's not hard. Look through different categories of people within your company or things that are interesting to you and just meet them. I work in strategic partnerships. I know nothing about, in my company, it might be Chinese porcelain. Would love to jump on for 15
I know nothing about Chinese porcelain.
No, I've worked at Christie's for 20 years.
It's pretty.
It is very pretty. And you could buy it at Christie's. But I do think that it's just setting aside a little bit of time to do that internal networking. And then I often suggest when I'm in meetings, when people say, we really feel like we're not seeing people as much as we used to around the water cooler. Of course not, because we're not in the office. So what can you do to recreate that? In meetings, give a minute or two to talk to the team. So you're not just diving into meetings. One of the men I work with at Christie's recently has done something on our 8 a.m. morning meetings where he asks everyone once a week to just, sort of one person, he'll say, Dana, what did you do this weekend? And it's not supposed to be, I ate a sandwich for lunch yesterday. It's supposed to be like, come up with something creative that you did this weekend. And it's been interesting because people actually want to talk about what they've been doing because it's such a weird world. One woman just played the piano for us because she practices piano and that's what
Oh my gosh, I love that. My sister took up paint by number, but you can't even tell it's paint by number. It's incredible. Like she did. That makes me, in your book, there's a new chapter that you wrote. It's a bonus chapter, I guess I would call it, or a fresh chapter for the paperback. You write, oh my gosh, every page is dog-eared. So now I don't know if I can find the right one, but I write about how the number one fear of all humans around the world is public speaking.
Right.
And you did 2 things maybe you could talk about. One, that also extends to public speaking on Zoom.
Right.
And so you started getting requests from people saying, are there any tips for being a better presenter when it comes to having to do it virtually and on Zoom? But also, I really liked how you were innovative in figuring out something different and an additional thing that you could do with your programs that you do on Instagram, where people can sign up and take a class with you.
Yeah, I think this is just the way my brain works, but I have just this ability and love of finding the white space, which for me is always when questions start coming. In the same way that you started Minute Mentoring, for me, it was during COVID, I started getting questions over LinkedIn, over Instagram about sales, negotiation, a lot about public speaking, and as you just asked, about networking. And, I touch on all of these things in the book, but then I started thinking to myself, I can't answer all of these questions at the same time. This is just too much. People want one-on-one coaching, and there aren't any hours. There are no hours left in the day at this point.
That's why we started Minute Mentoring, actually. Yeah.
Exactly. And so for me, there's the Minute Mentoring, which is such an incredible program. And then there's also an opportunity to do almost a masterclass of sorts. These are skills that I know a lot about. And I often feel like if you can find a way to monetize the skills that you have, especially at a time when the world is imploding, you should try and see if you can do it. So one day in August, I kind of worked on a sales pitch for about a month. It was 3 minutes in length, touching on the fact that I felt like everybody in the entire world felt like their confidence had been battered to the core, and that everyone had totally written off the year 2020. Like we were all going to forget 2020. And so I said, what if this wasn't a year that we forgot? What in fact, if it was a year that we took the opportunity to really learn something that we've always wanted to do and learn to be better at something that will be integral at our job? And then I pitched this masterclass idea, which was four different opportunities for people to join me for 90 minutes every week. And I offered 25 seats and I put a price on it. And then I just sort of waited to see, and they all sold out. And it was one of those things that, and we both talk about the fear of getting over the fear as being such an important part of being successful. And I always think that when I feel that fear in my stomach, that I'm probably doing something right, because I'm out of my comfort zone. And I was sitting in front of my Instagram live, just like sort of twitching, because I couldn't believe that I was about to go on and actually say that I thought that someone should pay me for my time for doing this. But it was amazing to see the response. And then, as you said, people weren't thinking about it. They were just thinking, oh, I really do want to learn about public speaking. I'll do that. So it's been a really interesting way to pivot in this year and try something completely new.
And that just leads me to one other question for you I wanted to ask, and that is something that we talked about for my book, because I feel like I'm really not great about talking about money.
Yeah.
Negotiating. I do have a lawyer agent that has helped me since I left the White House, and I work in media. It's quite common for people to have that, but that's not common for most people all around. And at this time, during COVID, where you might have a company saying, gosh, things are really tough around here. Maybe you're due for a promotion or a raise, but you're doing it by Zoom. Like, any advice for people that are feeling like they might feel a little stuck right now and not sure how to approach that during this time?
I think the people's biggest mistake about negotiation personally is that everyone always thinks that it has to be contentious. Negotiation to me is a conversation. So when I go into a performance review knowing that my company last year did not do well, it doesn't mean I can't ask for something. And I think that that's where people have this perception that you cannot ask for anything. Like, you have to just be grateful for what you have. That's not true. They asked us all to take a pay cut last year at Christie's, and they came back to us and it was sort of like, you have to take a pay cut. There's no way around this. And so my first inclination was to start asking for other things. So if I can't get more money this year, then what can I get? Is it, I don't come into the office as many days post-COVID. Can I get you to sign a piece of paper saying it's okay for me to market a masterclass if you're going to take away money from my paycheck, right? So there are different things that companies are willing to do right now because they can't compensate you in the same way that you want to be compensated. It's never a problem to ask. And if this is the only thing you take from listening to this from me, please remember that you have to ask for more than what you want. Because at the end of the day, there is a number, right? You want to be on the higher end of that number always. And you never want to walk out thinking, I should have just gone for more because they said yes immediately. So always ask for more. We've said this. I've said this to you, Dana. It's sort of like, even if you're going through someone else, go for broke. The worst case scenario is they say, we can't give it to you. Best case, they give you more than you thought you were going to get.
Right. It's great advice. It really is good advice. I know people are really struggling with that right now, especially I think some companies are using COVID as a little bit of an excuse.
I know. Well, actually, can I ask you a question? Because in your book, in your first chapter, you talk a lot about, speaking. I think that you say, what was the quote exactly? Something about
butterflies?
Changes to be expected, embrace the change.
Oh, yeah.
What would you say? I mean, what is your advice right now to people who are entering the job market during this crisis? Because it is such a crazy time. I mean, someone who's just coming out of college, which I assume there are a lot of people who watch this. I mean, what would you say to them, even in media or in your industry?
So much, right?
How many hours do we have?
I think one of the things that I really try to stress in the book is that I wake up every day thinking I know less than I did the day before. Mm-hmm. Like, I am constantly figuring out a way to read more. It's one of the things I think has been a competitive advantage for me, is that I'm always the most well-read person in the room. Mm-hmm. And over time, everybody knows it.
Yeah.
So like when I was White House press secretary, when I walked into the briefing room, I wanted them to know I've read every one of your stories. I've talked to everybody here at the White House. I have all the information. I'm the powerful one here.
Yeah.
I'm 5 feet tall, but I got the info that you need. So to me, this is a cliche, but it is true. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
So I think that when you leave school, let's say you've just gotten out of school, or maybe you got out of school last year. Mm-hmm. And I have a young woman in mind. She wanted to go into event planning. Mm-hmm. She got a great job in December of 2019.
Yeah, 2019.
In event planning.
Oh, no.
And sort of like with you, in terms of the galas that were canceled, there's no more events.
Yeah.
So she went home. She was living with her parents, and she started making masks for hospital workers because she had extra fabric from her mom was an interior designer. She started making these. She's called Elizabeth Taylor. Her name is not Elizabeth Taylor. Her business name is Elizabeth Taylor. Tailor. And then that started going so well that people wanted to buy them. So she started selling them. And then she bought an embroidery machine. She invested in an embroidery machine. And now she's doing custom clothing and things for or like little baseball caps or whatever it might be for whatever anybody wants. And what I love about this is that, so she's not doing event planning. It's okay. She found something else to do. And it's just, I love the innovation, the motivation. I think she's very inspiring, and she could work in event planning in the future.
Yeah.
So I feel like having an open mind and continuing to learn as much as possible. When you and I came out of college, there wasn't YouTube or Instagram masterclass with Lydia. There was, you kind of felt, I think, look back, I'm like, wow, that was very stagnating. Mm-hmm. I'm a podcast enthusiast. I listen to so many. I highly recommend. I'll give you one, for example, Adam Grant, who is a best-selling author and a social scientist. He's just written a new book called Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. But he has a podcast called Work Life. I encourage every young woman that I meet to listen to the episodes that he's had. I think he's had 2 seasons and he's starting a 3rd now. Every different aspect of work. You're constantly learning. And Lydia, I think what I'm finding is that one of the things that young women maybe don't understand, and I stress it in the book, is that if you are an educated young woman in America, mm-hmm. you basically won the lottery already. All you have to decide is how hard do you want to work?
Yes.
I say the title of the book is Everything Will Be Okay, but that's not if you do nothing.
Right.
You have to make very good personal decisions. You have to be disciplined, and you have to think about how you are spending your time. And I think there's a lot of freedom in being disciplined. Mm-hmm. Once you think about that, there's freedom in discipline, mm-hmm. and order and rules in your life. And if you have principles that you stick to, you'll be able to navigate all of these twists and turns and become the most resilient person. I've been landing on this word because I feel that in 2020, COVID, mm-hmm. resiliency and reinventing yourself, perhaps like Elizabeth Taylor, that's been one of the most important things. And then I started realizing, what are the employers, what are the managers looking for? Mm-hmm. They're looking for that person that you can turn to and say, well, Dana, let's ask Dana. Let's go to Dana. Let's go to Lydia. Let's make sure that we ask Lydia. Lydia knows how to do it. Yeah. How can you be that person in the office that everyone wants to turn to because they either know that you have the answer, or you know how to find the answer, or that you are reliable, you are punctual, you are somebody who is there, cheerful, and ready to go. And to me, if you list out all of those things, that means how can you be the most resilient person? And that also will help you in your personal life as well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it's interesting because when I was reading, like even the chapter title, written by a woman who was a former young woman, I was actually thinking that as I was reading your book, because so many of the lessons that you talk about are lessons that you've learned over time and that you've honed. And you start the whole book by telling this story about a young woman who comes to you with complete quandary. And she says, somebody wants me to say something that isn't in my tone. It's completely disrespectful. And you tell her to sort of push back. And she says, but I'm no Dana Perino. And you said, well, how do you think I got to
Yeah.
be Dana Perino? And I thought that that was really encapsulated your entire book, because you got to be Dana Perino through everything you just said, right? All of those things, you kept perspective. You are well read. You walk into the room and you know what you're going to talk about, and people know that about you, and they come to you for those reasons. And I think when you read your book, that's really what someone would take from it, those life lessons.
You know, Lydia, I'll explain the story a little bit more, but it's so interesting you say that. You know, there was a diverse group of people that were all part of a book. Is not a solo project. Mm-hmm. It is very isolating when you're writing, but then when it comes to editing and promotion and everything, there's a group, right? So I know of 3 men that are off the top of my head that were part of the group of reading, and all 3 recommended that I cut that story from the book.
No, that's the glue of your book.
And so basically the story was this young woman calls from Washington, D.C. She worked in a congressional office, and there was a statement that they wanted her to issue, and she was very uncomfortable with it, and didn't want to put it out in her name as the press person. And so she called me looking for advice, and she thought she was going to get fired if she wouldn't issue the statement, which also I think that would be preposterous. But look, Capitol Hill wouldn't put it past them. So she was concerned she would get fired. And I said, well, you absolutely cannot say it. Integrity is your most important asset.
Yeah.
And you have to protect it at all costs. And she thought she'd get fired. So she said, well, I don't think I can say no, because I'm not Dana Perino. And I said, well, how do you think I became Dana Perino?
Yeah.
They knew they couldn't ask me to do something like that.
Yeah.
I think the feedback, and it was all well intentioned from the guys that thought I should cut that out. They thought it sounded too arrogant.
No.
And I think
you're powerful.
Isn't that funny? Like, we're writing books about women's empowerment, and that's the most important story. And I took it out for a minute, and then I slept on it. And I'm like, no, you guys, this story has to lead the book. That's also like the whole reason that I wrote it.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that I kept it in, because every early reviewer or early reader has said that it was very powerful. So
yeah, and I think that it goes to the core. I talk about this. You may remember this part of the first part of my book before the bonus chapter, where I talk about being in a meeting where someone who just come from a rival auction house said in front of a group of 20 people, "Oh, that Lydia Fenet, she really likes to sell herself," and I wanted to die. I crawled back to my office, just bright red, so mortified. How could I put myself out there, and how could other people think that they're saying that at a rival auction house? And she just said this in front of 20 of my colleagues. And as I was writing the book, 5 years out from that meeting, I said, how I wish I could go back and have had such a different response, and sat in that meeting and said, thank you, best compliment I've ever received, because no one can sell yourself like you. So that's what that story says to me. It means that you own your power and you live in the confidence that you've created for yourself. And so you can write that book because you are Dana Perino, and that is an incredible thing. I mean, I think it is. I loved it. I thought it was a great way to start it.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, we only have a few minutes left. I did want to ask you about this because we get this question a lot. How do you find a mentor or ask someone to become your mentor? What I write about in my book is that it's a little bit more organic than that I don't think you have to have formal mentoring relationships with everyone. There might be people that you admire from afar. Mm-hmm. There might be somebody in the office. It might be formal. But how do you find one, or how do you recommend people do that?
I completely agree with you. I find the idea of someone, the way that it's structured in most work environments, where you're supposed to meet every month with your mentor with lists of things to talk about, I find it so impossibly, it just doesn't work with our culture anymore. Yeah. That's just not the way people move, and it's not the rate at which you're having questions. You know, I say to people all the time, I'm like, I don't need to do a formal mentor program with you. If you have a question, ping me. Send me an email, shoot me a DM over Instagram. I'm happy to be a resource for you. And if I don't know the answer, I will pass you along to someone who does. So come into my network and think of us as a mentor for you. And I think that that's a more effective way in this day and age, because things are moving at the speed of light. I mean, look what we're going through with COVID. It's like every day is the same, but also different. So just being able to reach to one person who can sort of be, you know, your North Star in a way, but is not the only person you're relying on for everything, I think is a much better way to do it, because you also need different opinions.
The other thing is that we say in Minute Mentoring is that the only thing that we ask, we've never charged for our events. Mm-hmm. And what we ask everyone to do is you just have to promise us you'll pass it on.
Yeah.
But the other thing is I've realized like, I feel I am constantly being mentored by people that I meet. And I think that about you. I learned so much from this book. The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You. I recommend it to everybody. I've bought so many copies. I pass them out. I'm like, you have to read this. And then I tell them like, and I said, pick 5 takeaways from this book, and then we'll talk about them later. And I think that's also a good way to try to do mentoring. I'm not trying to give more reading assignments, though, I love that. But I do think that if you do have a formal relationship that is structured at your workplace, 1, good for the workplace, they're trying.
Yep, absolutely.
But 2, if it feels a little stilted and you don't know what to talk about, maybe find an article or a book or a podcast and ask that the parties, if it's just one-on-one or if it's a group, that everybody read that and then come in and talk about it. A little bit like a book club, but more like a kind of a mentoring club. I think that can be really helpful to learn from each other.
Yeah, and you're so great at that. You're always sort of pinging me different articles. Like, you see this about.
I don't know if people think that I'm great about it. I think that my new co-anchor, Bill Hemmer, is like, what? He said, I think I know your secret. You read and listen to podcasts at the same time.
And you just replied, I'm a woman. I can do
like, well, I get a lot done. I also listen to my podcast at 1.5 speed so that I can pick it up. Where can people find this book, Lydia?
So they can find it at independent bookstores. It comes out, it'll be available March 2nd, and it's on Amazon.com, obviously. But if you have an independent bookstore, please support them, because I am a huge reader and I love nothing more than a bookstore. So we have to get to them and help support them, especially during this time.
That's right. There's one that I support in Bay Head, New Jersey, Point Pleasant, New Jersey, called the Little Point Bookshop. So that's encouraging. So I encourage people to get this book. I hope you'll get my book as well.
Get your book. Let me plug it. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Are a woman who's graduating from college or business school in May, get that book, because
and also I do think that I've had a couple of dads of young women read the book, because they were telling me that they were struggling because their daughters are stressed.
Yes.
And they don't know how to help. And sometimes dads, for as well-meaning as they can be, don't realize that they're adding to the pressure.
It's true. It's very
and
true.
That doesn't necessarily help. But I think if you, the fathers, grandfathers, uncles, but managers, I think, managers, we're at a different time,
We're at a different time.
So many women have blazed trails ahead of us. And companies are starting to really reflect a more diverse culture. And also women are kicking ass everywhere.
Absolutely. And it's so wonderful.
You see that too, and everywhere.
It's amazing. It's amazing to see. And, I have 2 daughters and a son, and I love that they are growing up in a world where you're going to see both of those things. And I think it's so important for my daughters. I think it's so important for my son. We're always talking about it as a family. Like, mommy and daddy both work. We talk about that endlessly, because I think that's what it takes to show people that a world like this exists, and it's just as great. So I think as long as we all continue on this path, that we're moving towards a positive, equitable solution for all of us, that's the right path to be on.
Yeah. All right, Lydia, I feel very grateful that God put us on the same planet at the same time.
I look forward to our 25% indoor dining.
I'm gonna come down to your neighborhood.
Do it anytime. I'm here.
Okay. And then can we take a picture and put it on Instagram? Because you have a great Instagram.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you do too. And so does Jasper.
Thanks. And thank you to Minute Mentoring, to everybody who helped put this together. Again, Dee Martin, Jamie Zweiback, Bracewell LLP, Caitlin Sickles, Aaron Landers. It's a small group, it's a mighty group, and we'll continue to do these. Lydia, thank you.